I previously covered a very disrespectful opening from Magnus Carlsen played against Hans Niemann. He played one pawn to a3, and I'll link that video at the end if you want to see what happened in that game. Now this is another game which they played earlier this year. This is the Charity Cup online event, and we have to relish these old gems because they're not playing again anytime soon, who knows if ever. So let's see what happened. Hans had white, this is rapid chess, and he kicks off here with pawn d4. So e6 by Magnus, pawn c4, and very commonly at the top level you now see pawn to d5. But Magnus goes pawn f5. So why do I call this disrespectful? Well, the Dutch defence is a good defence in its own right, but at the top tier level of elite chess, you just don't see it played so much. It's more of a second rate opening. Why? Because you're weakening the king here slightly, and you get a very bad light squared bishop here stuck behind its pawns. So g3 was played, the standard way to combat this, though there are different setups. Knight f6, bishop g2, and now Magnus goes d5, the so-called stonewall Dutch. You set up this stone wall of pawns, but like said, this is a really ugly piece now. So knight f3 from Hans, bishop to d6, castles from both players, and this is an interesting moment. You very often see white going for moves like pawn to b3 here, potentially looking to trade these bishops like this, or sometimes the bishops trade like this, but you want access to e5. But Hans goes for a very different plan. He pushes on with pawn to c5. Much rarer, but again computer approved, and I don't mean that he's using a computer or he's got something up his butt. Like, that's not where I'm going with this. I'm saying he does a lot of prep, he does his homework, and so he's looking for these opening advantages. So the computer likes gaining this space here, and what Hans wants to do is go for this queenside pawn storm, as we'll see. Magnus, for his part, he's now going to look to push e5 when he possibly can. Very standard idea in the Dutch, especially when the tension's now been taken off d5 here. So we had knight c6 from Magnus. Now it might look weird putting the knight there running into this pawn storm, which we know is coming, but Magnus has a plan for that knight, which we'll see. So now a3 prepares b4, a5 clamps, knight c3 develops, and now knight to e4, very standard move of course. You hit this outpost, and you also clear room now for the bishop to come to f6 and support e5. Rook d1 from Hans, again a good prophylaxis move, geared up against black's main pawn break e5. Bishop f6, rook b1 prepares b4, and now we had bishop to d7 from Magnus, really standard maneuver which we're going to see here. So b4 played, captures, pawn recaptures, and now bishop e8. This is the maneuver I'm talking about. So often when you have a bad bishop, you see the players playing like this, the elite players, they're looking to then activate it outside the pawn chain if possible, and then you can, activate it down here. So b5 now played by Hans, and here's Magnus's plan for the knight. Now you can come to e7, you can come to a7, it's all very tricky, but this is absolutely the main human way to play, looking to come into this c4 square, and it's not so easy to cover that one. Hans drops this knight back actually to cover the square, but Magnus chops off, queen recaptures, and then he sinks this knight. So Hans nudges the queen into d3 here. So it's a balanced position now really. Magnus has done quite well, because although Hans has got these advanced pawns here, Magnus has got his own plans now to gear up for e5 in the centre. So c6 is the first move he played, bolstering this pawn here, and Hans could take, open the b file, maybe try and target the c6 pawn as a weakness later, but instead he closes the position, and now the tactics just break loose here. So e5 is played by Magnus. Now you don't want to capture, bad move, knight recaptures, and black's just better essentially. You've got this monster passed d pawn here, the bishop's going to activate soon, good position, you're on the a file, etc. So not a good move to capture. So what is the move to be played? You maybe saw it in the thumbnail, but if not, feel free to pause and have a look for the best move in the position here. So this is where Hans uncorks the knight takes d5 sacrifice. Great move, pawn recaptures. Now he's by no means better after this sequence of moves. Queen recaptures with check, but this is the best way to play to keep him in the game, otherwise he was just worse. And it's a roughly balanced position, dynamic kind of balanced, of course. It's very, very tactical now. So the rook blocks the check here. If you go with the king, then the problem is that we take this pawn here. Rook moves, bishop back to g2. Again, there's still a lot of play here, but with 3 pawns for the piece and 2 connected passers, bishop coming to f4, even though black can blockade with the bishop c6 stuff here, white is for choice and doing well, especially because the rook can invade at the right moment too. So the king didn't sidestep, this rook blocked instead, and now we had this one played to b2 developing, just holding off the capture. King moves, breaking the pin, now Hans takes that one. So the king recaptured, the rook swung into d5, pressuring this knight, and Magnus defends with his king here. Now we had a check, the king stepped back, and it offers a repeat of moves here actually, if Hans comes back. It's not to say that Magnus would have then repeated, but Hans doesn't even go for the offer of repeat. He immediately challenges the file, he really wants to fight. Love that about his spirit. So the rook captured, bishop recaptures, the knight now drops d7. So these ones got traded, but this is really tough now for Hans to play, because how do you actually defend this pawn, for example? So he starts with f3 to cover this knight hop. Now bishop c6 was played, very nice move, bolstering. The rook drops back, and so it's prepared to meet knight d7, hitting this pawn with rook to c2. But now here comes the king. Hans brings his. King d5, king e3, and now the knight takes on c5. You couldn't avoid that one, of course. Hans comes to f4, targeting this one, pushing e4 if he can possibly do so, but of course this one gets kicked out. Nice tactical response by Magnus, because if you capture, this is curtains, you're losing your rook, standard fork. So the king drops back. This king came to d6, pawn h4 now from Hans, gaining some space, and the time's getting low now for Hans. You know, he's under 3 minutes, Magnus has still got 6, pressure's on, he pushes h5, Magnus immediately targets, it was defended like this, captures, recaptures, the bishop bounced back to d7, now x-raying this pawn, rook c1 from Hans, coming behind if needed, king c5, e5 rather, and now the rook back to c3. Okay, Hans is shuffling, very difficult position to play. So here comes the knight. Now the king moves, knight d5 back, hits this rook, and also you've got problems with this pawn. What do you do here? The bishop's attacking this one. So Hans comes to defend this pawn, and Magnus doesn't even capture that b pawn now. He just holds off. He doesn't want to give some counterplay with rook b3, I guess. And so knight f6 goes after the g pawn. King f3 now played to defend. This one checked, king steps back, check, king moves. You can take the b pawn, but again Magnus wants to activate his pieces first, so crucial in an endgame. So rook f3 check was now played. It's very hard to hold this pawn, by the way. I mean, say you drop back with rook to g1, well, okay, this is an option, but knight e3 is even very good. Just squashing all of white's position, still threatening this pawn. You just don't have to rush things, such a Magnus-esque position. So coming back here, king f4, the rook checked, this one was captured, now it checked again, you take here, so you've lost your h-pawn, but at least you've gained that g-pawn. And now without going through all the detailed moves here, we basically see these pawns getting traded off for each other. So we had lots of shuffling moves. This is a long game, so I don't want to dwell too much here. It goes on for 90 odd moves. We're at move 61 here. So we see these pawns now getting traded off the board. Hans brings his rook behind that h-pawn. Now we see it coming back and here. Okay, trades. And now the b pawn gets going. And this is the problem with the rook versus the two minors. Plus a pawn. It's just really, really difficult to defend, of course. But the interesting moment here is that we see Hans actually give his rook for the pawn. So we're getting all the way to this position here. Magnus is making the progress. Hans down to 14 seconds versus 5 minutes. After this position here, now we see the rook give itself up. Now for me, I would actually struggle to do this checkmate. I really need to learn this one and take the time. The two bishops is easier, but this one's harder. You kind of make the W shape from memory. Worth actually learning one day. Anyway, Here we actually had a resignation after knight to d5, so Hans trusts that Magnus will know how to do this checkmate. He is world champion, of course, so I'm sure he would. If you want to see another disrespectful opening move from Magnus between these two players, check out the video on the left, and see the latest video in the Scandal Cheating Crisis, the documentary I released recently. Check out the video on the right. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.